Hey everyone, and welcome to today's MBTI Debrief. My name is Merja Sumiloff. I'm the Personality Decoder. I am a certified MBTI practitioner and Master Integration Mentor with Sumiloff Academy of Human Integration. And I'm here with the Joy Genius Lisa Payne, who is an Enneagram profiler, emotional archaeologist, and a senior integration mentor with the Sumiloff Academy. What are we talking about today, Lisa?
Today's topic is boundaries.
Oh. I think one of the topics that most people ask help around, certainly in my experience, but also probably the topic that most people have experiences around that are uncomfortable. Either in setting or receiving.
Absolutely.
What's your experience around that working with clients?
I feel like there are a lot of misconceptions around boundaries.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting the reasons why people think that they need boundaries. Right. As opposed to thinking that they need them just in their everyday life, as need to have them and have them with themselves, with themselves and with other people. Because I used to think, people only set boundaries with me when they're angry and other things, and I don't like boundaries. And for a really long time I didn't even know what a boundary was, because people just used to trample all over me.
Yes.
And I would respect everybody's boundaries.
Yeah. So why don't we start with what are boundaries even? Shall we start with that? Okay.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are familiar with the 4 people within course, you already have heard this many, many times described in this way. Boundaries to me are something that define who we are. They're almost like a container of who I am and where other people are. So boundaries to me define what is me and what isn't me. And they also show us where someone else starts and where you end, or where someone else ends and you begin. And boundaries are those kinds of perimeters that can help keep close to us the things that are important to us and what nurtures us, and then away things that don't nurture us, that we don't want to have in our lives. But of course, the challenge with boundaries is often that we look at it just as that one point of reference, what is and what isn't me, where there's actually a lot more into it. There's a lot more into boundaries. But I think today, let's start with understanding the very basic definition of boundary even, and one that's really clear that every person has, at least to some degree, their own skin. So our skin is the container that contains our physiological body. Now, of course, energetically, we can be more expanded than our skin, but we own, inverted commas, we own, it is ours, what is within our skin. And whatever is outside of our skin is separate from our physiology. So that's kind of the easiest way to explain, from my perspective, what boundaries are in a very easy way. What about you, Lisa?
Actually, this particular part that you just explained was fundamental to my understanding of boundaries. When I learned, all of a sudden, I started looking for boundaries everywhere. I would look at, when I go out, and some would call them barriers. I mean, it depends on the mood I was in when I went out. But even like if I put on my sunglasses, my headphones, and my mask, this is a don't talk to me. I don't, I'm not interested in conversation. And it's funny that you mentioned like energetics, because when I'm in New York, that never stops anybody from talking to me and asking me questions. But it is so interesting to look at, you know, ourselves, a door, a curtain, anything that just forms a barrier between us and others. And it also, it triggered me a bit as well, because it reminded me of when my husband used to get in my face all the time.
Oh,
and how he overstepped that fundamental boundary.
Yeah.
This me, you know,
Yeah.
not even
Yeah.
my space around me, in as close as he could possibly be, as if it made him bigger.
Wow. So there's a dynamic there that comes with that you can really express what a boundary feels like to you. And I think a lot of people actually have a story, a painful story, a negative experience when it comes to boundaries and boundary setting. Wow, that really illustrated it really, really well. Boundaries can also be like a distance. So it can be a physiological thing in your face. But you mentioned, you know, your space. It can also be a distance. So some people call it ghosting, where you create physical or emotional distance between yourself and somebody else. There's a lot of pain, especially in certain relationship dynamics, that can come from that type of boundary setting, or can be triggered by that kind of boundary setting, because, you know, nobody who hasn't had a previous trauma will be necessarily other than an infant initially, and that's enough to traumatize some people in the infancy of being left alone, and certainly was the case for me. But distance, whether it's deliberately created or it's created out of your own pain. And so let's just say that I'm in pain and I've got upset about something that you said, Lisa, and then I just like don't respond to your messages, or I refuse to talk to you, or if we're in the vicinity of each other, I just walk out of the room and that's it. That is also a form of boundary. So boundary doesn't necessarily have to be anything other than air. Air can be the most painful boundary to some people. So, and that plays into a lot of our kind of attachment styles and the dynamics that play out in our relationship from a previous experience in our lives. So we need to not just be aware of what people say, because words can be a boundary, how they behave, because behavior can be a boundary, like that is a boundary, right? Or somebody hitting you is a boundary. Somebody, you know, and obviously we're not condoning any kind of violence, but people do all kinds of things out there in the world. So we have all these different boundaries, but you can have something that's not even anything, which is air, which is distance, that is also can be an effective boundary, especially if there's abuse. And I think we'll talk about that in a moment. And sometimes a boundary is going to court and telling, you know, asking the court system to set a boundary on your behalf. That's another boundary. So there are a lot of different things that we can call a boundary. It can be a boundary fence, it can be a boundary gate, it can be a barricade too. So it can be a 12-foot tall wall with barbed wire and ground glass at the top.
Mhm.
That's a boundary. Well, that's more of a barricade, but and what's the difference between boundaries and barricades is that boundaries can be flexible to a certain degree. So boundaries are almost like a gate that you can open and close, and open to what degree you want, and then close to what degree you want. So whereas a barricade is something that's usually a well-established piece of real estate around you for your own self-protection. And I can't even imagine how hurt that. I was going to say, I can't imagine how hurt you'd have to be to build a barricade. That's not actually true. I can imagine, and I have experienced it. So where I had to protect myself with a barricade in the past. So
Me too.
Yeah, let us not judge those of us who are barricading ourselves.
Well, sometimes you can share a bed with somebody and be the loneliest that you've ever been, because there is an emotional distance
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Yep.
And that can be even more painful than a physical boundary.
It can be. Yeah. And you've probably heard me say, and certainly some of you out there have heard me say potentially multiple times, because I feel like I'm talking about this all the time, but most relationship problems stem from misunderstandings or inability to understand oneself. And the challenge, so let's just say that you and I, Lisa, were fighting, and neither one of us, because we need to feel right in order to feel like we've preserved our sense of selves, is willing to listen to the other person, not even agree, but listen to the other person. So you're at that kind of a headlock where there's no room for any negotiation or any not even negotiation yet, because we're not even talking about agreeing or disagreeing, but even hearing the other person out. A lot of our sense of self-preservation is tied into us not trying not to even listen to the other person, because a lot of us are told how wrong we are for most of our lives. So we think it's a dichotomy. We think we're either wrong or we're right. But what if both people could be right in what their personal needs are, their personal values are, and their personal perception and unique perspective of the situation is? So how about, and this is certainly something I do when I work with clients and couples in particular, how about we start with the assumption that just because somebody else sees something differently than you, that one person has to be wrong and the other person is ultimately right? Because in everybody else's universe, the roles could be reversed.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah. I mean, you just think about something like the Twilight Zone, which used to turn situations on their head. So there was one in which beautiful people, what was perceived as beautiful, was actually perceived as ugly in that universe. And just watching these two things shift, and see, it's like what I think and what I feel are not necessarily going to be what you think and feel, because we have had completely different experiences in life. We share certain values, and there are other things which I'm sure that we are diametrically opposed on. However, that doesn't stop us from sharing that, that common space.
Yeah, 100%. So for example, for you and I, Lisa, we both love Roy Kent, the character in in Ted Lasso. But I'm a Liverpool Football Club girl all the way, and you you choose to, for whatever reason, support Man United. Like, what is that even?
I cannot with you. I just can't. Oh.
So here we go. It's a pretty good relationship if you have to look for these kinds of problems.
Yeah. I left my Man U mug downstairs. Oh well, that's okay.
Okay, so coming back to boundaries. What are boundaries? I think short and sharp answer that we can say what are boundaries is boundaries are structures that, whether they're physical or non-physical structures, that we put around ourselves to contain who we are, our thoughts, our feelings, our body, our space.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Do we agree on that for now?
We do agree on that for now. Yes.
Awesome. Well, the second thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was the difference between setting boundaries and having boundaries. Does that sound like a good idea? Because people might be thinking, well, what's the difference? What's the difference?
Yeah, that's where I said there's such a misunderstanding of boundaries. I think people just think boundaries and they think that is it, but the floor is yours. Carry on. Yeah.
So there's a fundamental difference between setting boundaries and having boundaries. And when we talk about boundary setting, and as you've mentioned, there's confusion around this, right? We think that setting boundaries is the same thing as having boundaries with people. And we may, like, if we zoom out enough, we might say that that's true. But we can create nuance around these two separate activities, because they're actually verbs. They're, I'm boundarying, I'm setting boundaries, or I'm having boundaries. And setting boundaries is when you have to clarify your position. You have to make sure that the other person understands the position that you hold, and give them consequences for if they don't respect that boundary. So that's what setting boundaries is. Okay. Mm-hmm. Having boundaries is much more kind of passive space, where you know what your boundaries are, you live according to, and all your communication is around these are the boundaries, and people accept those as an extension of who you are as a person. So I'd like to simulate this a little bit with you, Lisa, if you're all right with that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just say that let's take a thing that can you pretend to be one of my clients who turns up late into a client session?
Sure.
Okay. So I'm sitting here and you're kind of tuning in and just take whatever approach, just kind of be sorry, and I'm sorry I'm late, and so on. So let's do this.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Hey, Merja. I'm really sorry I'm late. I had to get the kids to school.
Yeah, so I understand that you have a lot going on, but this is important for you. You should be here for your own benefit. It's my time, and please don't do this again, or otherwise I'll have to charge you extra for the session. Now, that's what setting boundaries looks like. It's a bit harsh in this situation, because
that one was really harsh.
Right? Right? So that's a setting boundary. So let's do the same. So you do the same, and I'll show you what having boundaries looks like.
Okay. Hey Mary, I'm really sorry I'm late. I had to get the kids to school this morning.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And did you get there okay?
Yeah. It was
Yep.
fine. We were a bit late.
Yeah, yeah. And do you need a moment, or are you feeling okay to start our session?
I'm okay. I composed myself in the car coming back.
Okay, great. Well, let's make the most out of today's session. And don't be afraid to just give me a text or a message if you're running late. It's, these things happen sometimes.
Okay. Okay, great.
So yeah, so that was a form of having boundaries, which is my value is not diminished by you being late, and I
Mhm.
don't have to make it explicit. I don't have to like talk at you to set that boundary. This, I hope that makes sense to our viewers, because when you have boundaries, you know what your boundaries are, and you don't have to enforce, like you don't have to force them. You may have to
Mhm.
enforce your boundaries at some stage if this becomes a regular thing. So for
Mhm.
example, having boundaries in that situation, if this was a regular occurrence, I could say, hey Lisa, um, do you want to move our meeting forward, say by half an hour? Does that work for you? It gives you a little bit of that extra time in there. But I'm saying I want to do the work with you. I want to do the full hour, and it's in your benefit to do that. And if it
Mhm.
continues to happen, regularly, it's not going to work for me. So I'm still saying the same things. I'm just not setting boundaries with you because it's unnecessary in this instance.
Mhm. Yeah.
Do you
It,
have?
it's
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's a way of having a shared boundary. Because if I say, yes, I would like to move the session, then yeah, probably problem solved. If I say, no, 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 I know that it's happened over the last couple of weeks, and it's been really extraordinary circumstances because dot, 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 whatever.
Yeah.
And I explain that to you, and it's like, okay, so then we would both have the expectation that I wouldn't be late again
Going forward. Mm.
going forward. Yeah,
Yeah.
because this is, extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah, exactly. And if it is something that, because I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who have that one person in their lives who says they're going to do something and then they do something entirely different consistently. And now it's coming to a point where you have to make it their responsibility that they're not going to be there. So, for
Mm-hmm.
example, I could say if this changed and the client was perpetually late and wasn't, and they just kept saying, no, no, yes, I'll be there on time, but they aren't. I would then maybe have to set boundary, but I might not go straight into this and this and this and this. I
Mm-hmm.
might go
Mm-hmm.
into, okay, um, the problem with um, this lateness is that you're showing you with your activity or your rushing or being in this situation where it continues to be a problem to be on time. You're showing yourself that you're not prioritizing your own work, and this that you're not a priority in your life, and I want you to be a priority in your life. So,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a form of boundary setting, but you wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily think that if you think in terms of black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we
Yeah.
know that life is shades of gray.
Life is definitely shades of gray.
And all kinds of rainbow colors and sparkles and sprinkles in
Mm-hmm.
between.
Pixie dust and all that stuff. Yep.
All that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, with boundaries, with setting boundaries versus having boundaries, do you have an example for us, Lisa? Do you have a story where this has really been illustrated to you in your own life?
I think with the having boundary side, something that has come up in the past, and I know I've done it in the past, is that if I have something in my head and I haven't actually expressed this to somebody else, and I do that, if you loved me, you would know exactly what I need.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that particular one myself. Yeah.
It's like, why don't you know? As if I'm expecting them to be a mind reader.
Yeah.
And it's in my head, and I'm so adamant about it. It's as if, like, so when I think part of that comes with people pleasing in the past. So when there's people pleasing, there is a lot of figuring out what other people's boundaries are.
Yes.
And so because I've been played detective, I expect them to play detective as well.
Yeah.
Whereas all they want me to do is tell them.
Yeah.
Just tell me what you want.
Yeah.
Just tell me what you need. I am not a mind reader.
No, and it takes a lot, and you would know this as the past people pleaser, that it takes a lot of energy and emotional real estate to try and figure out what somebody else needs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a form of hypervigilance that can really sabotage our own lives.
Yeah. And then when that argument is sort of going on, that one-way argument, because the other person is genuinely perplexed as to what is going on here, then it will be, I want you to do this. I need you to do this. I need you to do this. I need you not to do this. I need you to do this. And, it goes on. And they're like, okay, thanks for letting me know. And it's like, thanks for letting me know, because I'm clearly angry, and I think I am justifiably angry, and I'm not justifiably angry. It's a case of step back, take a breath, Lisa, and think of exactly how you would feel if the shoe was on the other foot.
Yeah. So
it's hard, and this is where communications and relationships and friendships can be really difficult. All relationships can be incredibly difficult if one person is holding their own boundary and assumption, and they've never expressed it to the other person. Yeah.
That is so interesting. I had a situation a couple of years ago where I was having a conversation in my car with somebody that I've known for most of my life, and we'd never had a fight, and we were having what I thought was a conversation about books, and I was trying to help them find the kinds of books that they said that they were looking for. And I was saying, what about, this resource? Because my way of trying to resolve or trying to find an answer is to kind of create bigger categories first, like in which bucket could it belong, and then investigate that bucket further, if that makes sense. So I was kind of like, well, could it be like these people who have written about this? Could it be this segment? Could it be this? And they couldn't kind of nominate any one of the buckets. So I was like, okay, let me go into that bucket and see if there's something deeper there that might speak to them. So I continued to ask questions. And all of a sudden, they started yelling at me for judging them. And I was sitting there in the car going like, this is a really strange situation. And so I pulled up to the side of the road. Unbeknownst to myself, I had this brain injury already, so my brain couldn't handle shouting in small spaces. So I pulled over and And I was looking at them and saying, I'm not sure what's happening right now. Like, what are you actually saying? And they literally, and actually, I was supposed to be in a team meeting with you and the team. And I messaged you all to say I can't make it today because I'm sitting there with this childhood friend, listening to them yelling at me for an hour and a half, and I'm just sitting there going like, I don't understand what's happening. But what I do understand is that I need to just stop yelling in my car because it's unsustainable for me. And their response was, I yell if I want to. And at that stage, I realized that, well, I mean, I knew I was confused anyway, and that's why I was trying to ask questions to find out what was actually, like, where they were coming from so that I would understand what they're actually saying. So, because most relationship issues are a communicational challenge. And that's when I realized that they don't actually want to, they don't want me to understand where they're coming from. They want me to take responsibility for their emotions, the emotions that they're experiencing in that time. And then because I know them for such a long time, I thought, this is a stance against their mother, and they're playing it out with me. And whether that's true or whether that's just my perception, I kind of said, well, there's a boundary there for me that I'm not going to be doing that. So whoever you think you're talking to about whatever you think you're accusing them about, like, I don't actually have to take part in this. And that was the boundary there. But it took a long time to get to that point. And I know that a lot of people would have just told them to get lost. But yeah, it is. It is. But then our relationship broke down. But I know that I did what I could, like all I could in that moment. So I didn't leave anything on the table, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I said, like, lay it all out. This is all I've got in this situation. And I think with boundary setting, you know, what you were saying, that people think that, like, that you were pointing out the point that we think that people should know if they loved us. And we don't. I couldn't I could not make sense of what that person's need was. And the only thing I could make was an assumption at the end to say, it looks like this person is playing out this dynamic with me. How do I want to be in this situation? So we don't know.
We don't know unless we ask. I mean, a personal thing is that now, you know, my youngest is always changing his mind about what he likes to eat, right? So I got back from New York a couple of weeks ago, and I noticed that he started buying large amounts of avocados. And I was like, okay, he likes some avocados. I saw some in the supermarket, and they were they had been priced down, and they were still quite firm. So they still had a long way to go until they got right. And so I asked him if he wanted this, and this for breakfast, and he said, I don't need avocados all the time. I'm like, I wasn't asking you if you needed avocados. I like avocados too. He goes, just because I eat something once doesn't mean I want to eat it all the time. I thought, where the fuck is this coming from?
What are we actually talking about? Yeah.
It's an avocado, for Christ's sake, you know? I didn't go any further into it. It's like, what, did I discover some long lost secret, some ritual sacrifice thing that you do with avocados and you can't do it because I bought the avocado? I mean, buy your own food. I don't care.
Yeah, this is not a big.
This is
not a like
not for me.
deal breaker.
It's weird. It's weird. Like you said, sometimes we don't. There is something bigger at play, and we don't know what the other person is actually talking about.
Yeah, or what they're thinking, or what emotional connection they have to that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
to that avocado.
Right. Or to me being judgmental.
Yeah, exactly. This has taken a turn.
It was bizarre, and I'm not saying I'm not judgmental. I mean, I'm a judger. Of course, I judge like everybody else, and I'm a person, so obviously I'm going to have blind spots that I'm not aware of. So, you know, and if somebody tells me that you're being judgmental, my immediate reaction to that is, tell me more about that, because I'm clearly not seeing something. But I didn't get the answer, so I don't know. That personal development path for me from that conversation didn't go much further than that, unfortunately, because I'm always happy to be wrong, and I'm always happy to grow.
Exactly, but you're not happy to have somebody yell at you in your car, because that's
for
ridiculous.
An hour and a half, and not like,
yes,
you know, I have, you know, the equivalent of a brain injury. My brain can't actually physiologically handle what's happening right now. So and the boundary setting in that situation. So I was having boundaries to the end where I couldn't have them anymore. And then I said, I'm just going to set this boundary now. So you either stop yelling or get out of my car, because one of those two things is going to have to happen in this situation.
Yeah. And my boundary was that I always ask, would you like this? Would you like this? Would you like this? Because if you tell me, if you can tell me what you want, then I don't have to guess. Yeah. And then everything is fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And if you're anything like me, which I don't think your distances are quite as long as they are here, you know, planning your weekly meal and then forgetting to get that one thing that you need for that weekly meal is a pretty big problem. You don't just pop into the shop here where we live.
Yeah, I literally have a co-op 1 minute walk away from me, so
I love it.
I don't have that particular problem, but yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
All right.
Difference between living in the UK and Australia, right?
Well, down the road in Australia is like 70 kilometers away.
Yeah.
Going down the road. So, and we also service our own cars here, because, you know, like the nearest garage is 50 kilometers that way. So, you know.
Okay, so you're all mechanics as well.
Well, you know,
okay, cool.
Baling twine and duct tape comes in handy. It's good to have horses.
Okay.
So shall we move on? So why do we need to either set or have boundaries with others? Why do we need boundaries? And I think we have a couple of really obvious answers to this question. The main one is, if you are, you know, you need boundaries for self-protection if you're in abusive situations. And if you are in an abusive situation, do what you can to get out. And if you're listening to this and you are in an abusive situation, but you feel like you can't get out of it, you can't ask for help because you're going to be attacked, send us an email at desk@merjasumiloff.com with the subject line, our gardening range. And then ask if we deliver to your address. And that is a sign for us to contact somebody on your behalf, to contact the local authorities and let them know that we've got this cryptic message. Okay, so if you're in an abusive situation, get out, do what you can to get out of it. And we're not people who are going to go like, well, why did you stay? That's not what we do. We just want you to be safe, and we want you to have your life. Okay. Now, on top of that, something to consider in abusive situations is your situation abusive, or are you perceiving that the situation is abusive? So this can be a really difficult thing because to determine, because a lot of people who are in actual abusive situations often take all responsibility in that situation and think that they're just overreacting. And people who are actually overreacting in those situations where it's just their own trigger and they're not wanting to essentially, learn to how to set boundaries, that they're immature in the boundary setting, they feel like they're being abused oftentimes. So there's this crisscross that is horrific for those who are being abused, and certainly causes a lot of havoc in the lives of people who perceive that they're being abused when they're actually not, when it's just that they just need to back down and actually take some responsibility for themselves. So this is a really complicated, when we talk about abuse, it's a very highly complicated and nuanced topic. And only you know that only you can nominate yourself whether you're being abused or whether you are suffering perceived abuse, okay? And the way that you know for yourself is that if your ego takes a hit, so if let's just say that I'm in a partnership with somebody and I feel like I'm being abused, my question to myself is, are they looking to hurt me actually? Are they actually looking to hurt me? Or am I choosing to feel hurt because I don't want to grow and I don't want to own up my part in this? And the way you know that it's the latter is if other people and circumstances in your life, coming from people that have nothing to gain by attacking you, feel like they're attacking you. Okay? With the caveat of, if you have been abused as a child, you are likely to attract similar abuse from different spaces because you are tuned into that dynamic. So this has to be people who have nothing to gain from, inverted commas, attacking you. The way to find out if you are experiencing actual abuse or if you're experiencing perceived abuse is start asking questions if it's safe. You ask questions from people to say, hey, what do you mean when you say this? How do you see this? What do you mean by that? Talk to me more about this. And the people who are actually abusive don't want to talk about it. Not that they can't, there's a difference. They don't want to talk about it because they want to hold the power. Whereas there might be people who can't talk about it. They don't have the vocabulary or they don't have the emotional capacity in that moment to talk about it, but they come back to it later and try and resolve it. And those are the people who don't actually try to hurt you, but the situation is hurtful. Right.
That makes sense.
I hope it does. I hope it does, because this is a highly complex and nuanced situation, and anybody who's experienced any form of abuse in their lives, like I've experienced sexual abuse, financial abuse, emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse, at least those 4 things to a point of complex PTS.
Mm-hmm.
and harassment on top of that. But every situation is already a minefield. And if you've experienced even like one of those things, that's
Mm-hmm.
a massive minefield. Never mind if you've experienced several of those things. So
yeah,
please be kind with yourself when you're hearing
mm-hmm.
me talk about this thing, and if you feel triggered, because I understand how complex it is, and I also understand how easy it is to get triggered when you feel like somebody's marginalizing your experience, and that is not what I don't want anybody tuning into this to feel that, but I also can control the fact that you might, because I might have used a phrase or a wording or a tone of voice or any aspect, body language, anything that may have given you a reaction. And if that's the case, I apologize, because this is a hard topic.
Yep. Yeah, it is.
So one of the main places in life where we definitely need boundaries is for self-protection in abusive situations.
Mm-hmm.
Any personal reflections on that? That can be a heavy topic.
Yeah, I think I would take it, up a step, that for any relationship, especially a relationship where you are living with or about to live with someone who you could have been dating forever, recognize that you two may have had exactly the same type of upbringing, and the boundaries in your respective homes could have been completely different.
Yeah.
And so actually talking about, because boundaries can be anything from I want to have children, I don't want to have children,
Right.
to the I'm a vegetarian, I'm a vegan, I'm a meat lover.
Yep.
To the type of house that you want to live in, to where you want to live, to the amount of hours that you're willing to put into your career. It should cover as much as you possibly can, because then there are no surprises.
Yeah.
Once you move in.
Yeah.
And there are certain things that even if you take things like political differences, you can say, okay, we agree to disagree, and there are certain subjects which will be we won't be able to talk about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because that's just the way it is, because we both get really bent out of shape when we start discussing this.
Yes.
And so people of different persuasions, I'm just going to call it different persuasions, can have a relationship if they have excellent communication. And that's what I did not have with my ex-husband when I was getting married. I didn't have that. I did the assumption thing, almost like call it the assumption game. And it's like, you know what? I can't expect you to know, but at the time I didn't know that. You know what it is? I've been watching too many damn Hollywood movies.
Yeah. Because the questions are like, who's contributing financially, to what degree, who's buying what, who's doing what housework, like what's the division of labor around the house. There's so much more to living together or getting married than what the Hollywood movies portray. So that's a very good point.
Because Hollywood movie, you sort it out within, if it's a romantic comedy, an hour and a half,
Yes, and it's all fine at the end.
Everything is fine, yeah.
Yep. So that kind of brings me to that, where else boundaries are needed, the self-assertion in situations that affect us. So you gave a really good example of moving in together. And for me, it's the kind of energy that we bring into meetings with others. So what kind of time we spend together. And if somebody is consistently talking about, like, let's just say that I'm having a conversation with somebody over the phone, a catch up, and they just talk at me about themselves the whole hour. I didn't actually subscribe to that. I subscribed to us having a conversation, right? And it's been a boundary that I've had to set in the past to say, hey, nothing wrong with you wanting to vent. Not saying that, but let me know in advance what it is that you need, so that I don't show up on the call thinking it's something else and then I end up being at this. Because the fact of the matter is that a lot of our work as mentors is to just listen. And I don't want to have a life where outside of my work, that's all I still do. I'm not that. I'm on the Myers-Briggs, the global step 2. One of the facets is it's an extroversion introversion facet pair, and it's around whether you're initiating or receiving. And I'm a highly initiating person for an introvert, and there are a lot of people who are highly receiving people. For me personally, just receiving, when I should be 70% of my time, according to my personality profile, initiating, it's not going to work. It's just not going to work. So it's distressing when we know those facet pairs. It's distressing to not be able to have the proportions in our lives reflect who we actually are. It feels marginalizing. And so if we know what those percentages are, or the tendency is within ourselves, we can learn better ways of really communicate that to people, and make arrangements, maybe make arrangements to have more of that kind of a life.
Try to arrange the kind of people in our lives that give us that, because no one person is going to give us everything that we need. I must pull out my step 2 again, because that's just made me think, because I am more on the receiving scale, and it's interesting to know what the differences are, and actually live accordingly to that. And try and make it as much. It's never going to be 100%. However, we can get it as close as we can get it, and that, especially for us Enneagram 1s, means less frustration, means a lot less frustration in our lives.
100%. So for me, boundaries, come into play with that self-assertion in situations that do affect us, but also self-care. Where have you, in terms of self-care, have set some boundaries with other people?
I let, and it used to seem really weird to me that I did this. So when I first learned about Myers-Briggs and energy levels, I will say to friends or potential friends that I spend a lot of time on my own, probably about 70% of my time on my own. And I'm not going to text you every day. We're not going to talk every day. And when we go out, so if we go out to a restaurant, I'm going to usually want a quiet restaurant. And if you choose someplace that is really, really loud, I may say to you, you might want to go there with one of your extroverted friends, not quite in those words, but I know, and I will say, because I know that if I go to this particular place, which has really loud music and has TVs in the background, like a sports bar or something, my energy levels will drain really quickly, and I will probably have to leave within between half an hour to an hour.
Yeah, exactly. So it almost like with the self-care piece, that what your limitations are, and not just limitations as in they're a bad thing. To to what degree you're able to keep going, and then you know where that kind of the boundary there has to be asserted. Like in my story with this person, you know, it reached a point where it just wasn't going to go further than that. And self-care, again, like anything else that we do when we're in relation to other people, becomes much easier. We actually can garner a lot of support from other people in our self-care if we just learn to express you know, what our needs are. And well done for you know, saying that, because I can tell you right now, Lisa, when I see you, we haven't actually ever met in person. We've been working together for like 2 years. Which is hilarious. But when we do meet, it's not going to be a busy, loud restaurant. I can tell you that right now, because I also don't want to go there. But most importantly, I want to respect the boundaries that you have around this, because this is important to you. So therefore, it's important to me.
Yeah, exactly. And people are usually surprised when I say things like that. I'm like, look, if you want to go out and you want to be out for a while, the ideal for me is to be out in the open, because then I'm not absorbing what's coming off the four walls.
Yeah.
And I have much more energy if I am outdoors. Second is, if we're in a place that has relatively low music and high ceilings, so that there's space in there. And you know, other times it's just, you know, for me, like in a place with no music, it can be loud with talking and no music, and I'm good, because I don't want to be going, the reason I go out with most people is to actually have a conversation.
Right. I'm the same. Yeah.
And a drink.
I hear you.
Obviously.
Yeah. Obviously. Yep. So why do we need boundaries with others? Self-protection, obviously, self-care, self-assertion. But why do we need boundaries with ourselves? And that, to me, is, at this stage of my personal development, a much more interesting question. So I want to address that a little bit more too, because we often think that boundaries are just about the other people, right? When in fact, the boundaries, you know, when we first talked about what are boundaries, and we talked about that boundaries are like the container that holds us, who we are. But also boundaries with ourselves creates that container for us of what we expect of ourselves, what we put up from ourselves, what standards we have for, say, work or communications or relating. And if we don't meet those standards, how do we then set those boundaries with ourselves? And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the learning unit on Sumiloff.com. But it's a very interesting dynamic to take the boundary setting from out there to in here. You know, parenting is a form of boundary setting within ourselves.
Definitely.
We are, with boundaries with ourselves, it's a tool for us to become more of who we want to be, who we are, who we want to be. It's a tool for us to build the kind of life that we want to build, holding ourselves accountable and setting those standards of behavior and communication and even thoughts, because our thoughts can go down if those, shout out to our ADHD and ADD friends over there. Setting boundaries with your thoughts is also important at times. So why do we need to set boundaries with ourselves? I'm thinking self-establishment when working through complex psycho-emotional situations like complex PTSD, or any other type of healing. Because here's a boundary. you break a leg, your doctor tells you 6 weeks, no walking. And then on day 3, you're sitting on a horse and you're going like, ha, 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 I'm not walking. But it's still insane, right? So the boundary should be there. What about you, Lisa? Have you self-establishment when in a healing space where you applied a boundary with yourself?
It was one of the most difficult things for me, because for such a long time, I didn't have any boundaries with myself. And because I didn't have any boundaries with myself, it meant that I didn't have any boundaries with anybody else. So people could trample all over me emotionally, ask me to do things, and I'd be like, yeah, okay, sure. So learning to actually have my own boundaries, looking inward, realizing what my values were and the things that were really, really important to me. Once I became cognizant of the fact that I didn't have any boundaries, it was excruciating in the beginning. And then it became so much easier to set boundaries with myself, because I had to make it a conscious exercise until it came naturally to me. Right. And when once it started to come naturally to me, I was like, oh, this is why people don't get as upset about things as I do, because they got their own boundaries around this and it doesn't matter to them. Yeah. And it matters to me because I think that they're trampling these not even non-existent, but these things that matter to me and I've never expressed to anybody else. Yeah. So how can they possibly matter to somebody else if they don't know anything about them? Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. A really good point. And I think another space where we need to set boundaries with ourselves is our goals and our visions. So when we're working toward a meaningful goal and a vision, so whether it's a business venture, whether it's a hobby that you want to get really good at, a skill that you want to get really good at, playing a guitar, whatever. But something that I thought of as you were talking was a fantastic example of setting boundaries with yourself to establish yourself as a person different to the current one. So the one that's reached their goal or their vision is in a situation of, say, New Year's resolutions. We often fail at New Year's resolutions because we have the intent of being that person, but we don't have the boundaries to set with ourselves, the skills, boundary skills to set with ourselves to then succeed. I mean, of course, there are other things like, idealizing something and then discovering that it's not actually in line with your values, which could be a reason why you don't keep going with your New Year's resolution. But a lot of the people who say, I want to get fit, there's a benefit to them getting fit. They join the gym and then week 3 comes along in January and they don't go to the gym anymore. So it was because they didn't make the connection and parent themselves into the space of actually going to the gym and doing the workouts. Yeah, no strong emotional why they're doing it.
Yeah, so the excitement wore off.
Yeah, I've been there.
What's something around a goal or a vision that you've had to have boundaries with yourself around?
With my goals in general, actually setting time aside to make them happen. Because there have been times I've set goals and it's like, oh, yeah, I got this goal that, by the end of the year, I'm going to have done this, this, and this. And then I don't do a damn thing about it. Well, how? It's a dream. If there's nothing attached to it, it's just a dream. It's a hope. It's like, it's almost as if I'm expecting somebody else to give something to me. And it's that, again, having that emotional connection to why it is that I want to do it. Yeah. And once I started to have emotional connections to my goals, it's then then I don't set goals lightly.
Yes.
It's like they actually mean something to me, and that there is work to be done to actually make them happen, not a day and a half before the goal is actually supposed to happen. Because I haven't been there before.
Well, and that's really interesting about reaching goals. And there's that instant gratification of thinking that because you're thinking about the goal that you've achieved it, but of course you haven't. Working, like having the patience to build up to the goal, and then staying with the uncomfortable feelings that come with it. Because let's face it, if we already knew everything we needed to know to reach that goal, and if we already knew how to do everything we needed to do in order to reach that goal, and we'd done it, we'd already reached that goal, right? So the mere fact that we have a goal that we haven't reached means we're going to get uncomfortable on the way to the goal. So we can just accept that. Now we're starting at a whole different space where we can say, yes, instant gratification would be nice, but the fact of the matter is that that is a wish, like what you were talking about. Is it a wish or is it a goal? And if it's a goal, then prepare to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Absolutely. Yeah. Excuse me. Seem to have a frog in my throat tonight.
Oh, sorry to hear that. Do you need a moment, or are you good to continue?
I'm okay.
Awesome. Okay. So for me, I feel like we've covered a lot today in this particular debrief. And I want to jump into the learning unit shortly with you, Lisa, where we're going to cover how to set those boundaries with others, and then how to set those boundaries with ourselves. Because that is the skill that takes a lifetime to master, whether it's with other people or whether it's with ourselves. And remember, we are the people that we live with all of our lives. So it's a great investment to make to have that lifelong journey into this boundary setting. So I want to say that I hope that today's debrief gave you a really good understanding of the basics of boundaries. We may talk about this more going forward, and certainly you'll find a lot about this in our personal and professional development platform, Sumiloff.com, which is a subscription-based service where you can become a part of the Sumiloff Academy and do your personal and professional development in a very safe space where you won't be attacked. There's no trolling. There's no marginalizing. We are there to spur each other on. And I think spur each other on is actually a really bad way of saying it, because we won't be sticking each other with spurs. We will be cheerleading each other on whilst offering support for real change and actual results in your life. So if you want to take a deeper dive on this particular topic of boundaries, and you want to develop yourself, you want to make advances in your healing journey, you want to reach that goal or that vision, not the wish, but the goal or the vision that you feel would make your life more complete, consider joining us there. And if you are already a member there, just simply pop in there and check out the learning unit that's attached to this debrief. And for those of you who are risk averse, such as myself, I mean, then people say, well, you're not risk averse in other ways at all, like riding horses that are not broken in, or starting my own horses, or starting businesses or whatever. So actually, I'm probably not risk averse, but I think I am. I think I'm conservative and risk averse. People laugh at me when I say that. Please know that there is a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you join us on the platform and you say, hey, this isn't for me, no worries, all good. Thank you, Lisa, for doing this with me today. Let's continue on to the learning unit, and everyone else, have a fantastic day wherever you are in the world. And I'd love to hear your main takeaway in the comments. What really spoke to you about today's debrief?
Yeah.
And we'll see you the next time.
Definitely. Bye-bye, people.
Bye, everyone. Bye.